I'm Rich Briggs. I've been teaching at Brigham Young University, Idaho for 10 years. I oversee the ceramics area in the art department. We chose to build a wood-burning kiln. We had available materials from dismantling some other kilns, and we wanted to build a kiln. Even though we had a wood-burning kiln, we wanted to build another kiln for different effects and a little bit different firing schedule. I was very pleased working with student volunteers. We were able to work around our class schedules and build the kiln in approximately a month. In the fall of 2004, my students and I built a 2-chamber Noborigama wood-burning kiln, but I wanted to build another wood-burning kiln, a kiln that was more of an Onigama type kiln. In the book Japanese Wood-Fired Ceramics by Kusakabe Masakazu and Marc Lancet, I found a design that I thought would meet our needs. It features a Bori-type firebox, a relatively small arched wear chamber, and a tall chimney. It is designed to get a substantial buildup of ash in a period of time of 24 to 36 hours. And its smaller size was appealing to be able to fire on a more frequent basis. We began in late September of 2007. Our goal was to have the kiln built before freezing conditions, which is always a consideration in eastern Idaho. There's a natural ebb and flow to the amount of interest that you have with students during any time in a university setting. At this time, I have a small group of enthusiastic students from the advanced ceramics class. Most had not fired a wood kiln before. None had ever built a kiln before. The students will narrate the different phases of the construction.
The foundation of the kiln. It's one of the most important parts of the kiln because if you don't have a good foundation, your kiln's going to fall over. We used 3 types of brick with the kiln. First brick that we used after leveling the ground was your normal cinder block, which is used in buildings and houses nowadays. The second type of block that we put on top of that, after adding a layer of sand so to make sure that the kiln's foundation was level, was a flatter type of cinder block. It's just to kind of reinforce the base. So after we put down our main foundation of the cinder block, on top of that we put a high temperature fire brick. And when we did this, we put 2 layers, and we put the second layer staggered on top of the first, so that none of the molten ash, when the kiln is fired, reaches the cinder block and makes it explode because of the temperatures.
A lot of the brick that we were using, since it was donated, it had been used with the previous kiln. Just scrape off a lot of the old mortar so that the bricks had better lines, and a lot of the mortar is just a little bit of, in little spots, it was just kind of caked on there, and so we just had to scrape that off a bit so that it was a nice, fairly even brick. Our purpose in doing that was just so that the brick would lay well onto where it's supposed to go, and so that the brick had to be perfect, but rather that it needed to be neat. The kiln, it didn't need to be perfect, but it just needed to be sound.
The firebox is a Buri box style firebox, which means that the fire is pulled down into the kiln instead of moving up into the kiln. The kiln has a small wear chamber compared to the firebox and the chimney. However, because of the size of the firebox and chimney, the kiln is also very efficient.
We're going to be taking 9-inch bricks and spanning them like that. So this is, we've got some little quarter brick, or we could fill in with castable, but this is how we're spanning the flue openings. Just got to make sure that we're got a good overlay on these bricks so that we don't have anything just collapse on us.
The fire gets pulled down by the draft into the wear chamber through the flues. The flues are pretty large in this kiln. It encourages the fire to get into the kiln, but also encourages the ash to get into among the pots as well. There are air holes above the grate where the wood rests and below at floor level. The grate is made of stainless steel bars and also encourages the draft that the chimney creates on the other side of the kiln. The bury box style firebox, because of the draft of the kiln, pulls the fire down into the kiln, and that the air vents at the floor level, part of their job is to burn the ash pit down.
This section was finishing the top of the firebox, and we had to figure out a way to span the opening either with bricks or high alumina shelves covered with castable, and then we finished with a layer of bricks. We chose the method of high alumina shelves covered with castable because the materials were available and it was the most economical way to finish the firebox.
Or if there's enough stitching. Most of the oxides that we use for coloring, they're also fluxes.
The chimney box on this kiln is actually a bit larger than chimney boxes on other kilns of this size. It is made this way to help in creating a draw that is needed in this type of a kiln. The flue in the firebox and in the chimney box are identical, allowing an even airflow through the wear chamber. The ratio between the flue and the chimney stack is important in creating the draw that is needed to pull a flame through the kiln.
We have about 4 or 5 different kinds of castable material that we've gotten from various sources. And castable material has a shelf life. Ben and I did a test to see which ones were really strong and then which ones are just, they're just not as strong as they used to be. And the one that we came up with that we've got plenty of is the power cast that's back there in the corner. So I think any places around the arch for spanning large areas, we're just going to be putting in some power castable. Because that one seems like it's in really good shape.
So to construct the arch, a wooden frame was made from plywood, a masonite shell, and 2x4s, and that had to be in place in order for us to lay the brick on top. Now, bricking the arch was achieved by placing arch bricks directly on that wooden frame. There were some gaps, and we filled them with castable, so the outside edge of the arch lied flat on the form. For the interior of the arch, we chose to follow a recommendation from the book Japanese Wood Fire Ceramics. This describes recessing some of the arch brick in a zigzag pattern to create a dancing flame. This also was to allow accumulation of ash to drip onto the pots from the uneven arch surfaces. Because this arch is wider than it is tall, it is reliant upon the firebox and the chimney for support. In addition, the arch cap was built over the arch for support and insulation. The arch cap was constructed with full-size brick, and then the interior space was filled with partial brick, rubble, and castable. The arch cap creates a uniform rectangle shape to the kiln, which was very helpful for tying the firebox, arch, and chimney all together. In order to observe and record the temperature inside the kiln, we made provisions for a pyrometer to be housed in the top of the arch.
We adjusted the height and diameter of the chimney to allow sufficient draw at our high elevation. Between the chimney box and the culvert is a damper which is accessible from both sides of the kiln. Adjusting the damper controls reduction, and when the firing is done, they are pushed all the way in order to keep the heat in. This allows the kiln to cool off slowly.
that's the plan, to get the 12-footer in place and then put the 8-footer.
The other one's
And I've been wondering if we ought to have one person on the roof. So once we get it close, there'll be somebody up there to kind of help pull it through.
And in preparation for the chimney stack, it was necessary to reduce the opening to fit the covert that was used. The 16-inch covert reduced the weight on the chimney box and gave us the proper square inches that were needed.
Because of available materials, we chose to weld angle iron to create a frame.
The chicken wire was used as a fastener. It was just to help keep the capping coat on there well. The insulating coat was made up of 3 different parts. One is vermiculite, red clay, and Portland cement. The coat had some red clay in it, which helped to make it into a nice adobe-like shell and make it aesthetically pleasing, I guess, as we like to say. The 2-inch coat was made just to insulate and to dissipate the heat that would radiate from the kiln.
There are 7 places in which you can place your pots within the kiln. Location is chosen based on the amount of control the potter wants to have on the glaze of his pot, which is to say, the amount of ash he wants to have accumulate on his pot.
For the firing, we knew we were going to need between 1 and 2 cord of wood, and the wood that we had stocked up was from a local mill left over, and they came in 20-foot lengths. The firebox is a specific size, so we had to cut the wood down into about 24-inch lengths,
and then split those into smaller pieces. It's a pretty important process to have all the wood cut before the firing because the fire actually needs wood pretty constantly, and if you're spending all your time preparing the wood, then it's hard to get the temperature up as quick as you need.
This first firing went very well. The kiln was able to reach temperature and maintain temperature without a struggle. It's a very efficient design. We fired for approximately 30 hours.
In the firebox, it's beneath the grate bars that the pots are placed. They will accumulate the most amount of ash. Then we go into the entrance flue, and it also accumulates a great deal of ash, as well as the next section, which is the main wear chamber of the kiln. And it is divided by a bag wall. That first section of it before the bag wall is where we chose to do a tumble stack. Typically you put your pieces anywhere between the firebox and the tumble stack that you don't have a glaze on. You want the ash to be the glaze. The bag wall will separate the main wear chamber. You can put pots on top of the bag wall as well. Behind it is where we put shelves. It's a more appropriate place for your pots that have glazes. You want to have more control over what the overall appearance of your pot is. After the wear chamber is the exit flue. Again, you can put your pieces that are glazed. You won't have very much ash in this section. And it exits to the chimney, and we kind of called that the secret chamber. Below the chimney is the last place that you can put your pottery pieces.
It's a fair question to ask, why wood fire? It's such a labor-intensive process. To be stoking the wood continually, if you can get a similar effect in a gas or an electric kiln, it makes sense to do it that way. But there is an aesthetic that you can get in a wood kiln that is difficult or impossible to achieve in other kilns. And that's the effect that we're interested in. I also believe that you have to enjoy the process. You have to want to be there to chop the wood, to prepare, and to go through the hours of stoking in order to get the effect that we're looking for. We learned many things that will help us with future firings to get more of the results that we are looking for. One of the best defenses for firing in a wood kiln comes from Suatsu Yanagi in the book The Unknown Craftsman. He makes the claim There is a place where beauty and ugliness are yet unseparated. This may be an unfamiliar or uncomfortable notion in our Western culture, that beauty and value are found in imperfection. But in many cases, that's what a wood kiln is designed to do, is to accentuate imperfections.